Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our seminar series, Hong Kong Polytechnic University English and Communication Department. We are very glad to have you here today, and we are honored to have our speaker with us too. But before everything, I need to check whether you can hear me. So could you please kindly in the chat box type yes if you can hear and see me? Okay, I'm getting one yes, two yeses. Okay, enough yeses. Thank you very much. So, let's start actually at the end of February with a very interesting topic, SLA Pedagogy, Legitimation, Code Theory, and AI, which is going to be delivered by Dr. Dominic Edsall. I'm going to introduce our speaker a little bit. Dr. Edsall is an honorary postdoctoral fellow at University College London Institute of Education. He collaborates with Professor Lethan Gray on AI and education projects. He also coordinates curriculum, pedagogy and assessment for 36 teaching departments in the Education Center of Kyoto Prefectural University of Medicine, including faculty development and quality assurance. Additionally, he leads an EFL teacher training course at Nara Women's University. His research focuses on AI in education, higher education, English medium instruction, content and language integrated learning, legitimation code theory, learner autonomy, pedagogy, and teacher development. So many interesting keywords that you have seen in the abstract and you have registered for this talk to listen to them. I'm sure that you are going to enjoy it. So Dr. Edsall Dominic, floor is yours. For 45 minutes, we will have the talk and we will have the QA session after that. However, feel comfortable and free to write your questions in the chat box during the talk if you don't want to forget them. After the talk, you can continue with typing the questions in the chat box. But also you can actually speak with our invited speaker and through this communication, ask your questions or provide suggestions. Okay, before we start, do we have any questions from the audience? Everything's good? Can you show me a thumbs up or yeses again in the chat box if we are ready? It seems that we are ready. Okay, thank you very much. Dominic, to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's good to be talking to such a large audience in a variety of different places. So first of all, I'm going to explain a little bit about myself because obviously from that description, I wear a lot of hats. Mainly to prevent the sunburn, but still it's a lot of hats. So let me kind of give you a little bit of overview. I'm not the usual English teacher. I actually have a science background. I went to Imperial College London, chemistry, became a science teacher, and then I retrained to be an EFL teacher. And I did a PhD in curriculum pedagogy and assessment at UCL Institute of Education, which is tries to be the ugliest building in London and does pretty well at that. So let me jump straight into this topic because we need to think about, this topic is a moving target. I remember 20 years ago as a student, people saying that a computer was obsolete by the time you got it home. In this topic, there might be things that are already obsolete. We don't really know. So I'm going to try and get into some of the more important things straight away. And AI in an educational context, right? So this question, how has AI changed the way we think about language learning? I want you to think about that. We're going to, well, let me just jump a little bit ahead. For most English teachers or EFL teachers or language teachers, we think about language learning more from a teaching perspective, right? We were learners ourselves. We understand a lot about the learning process or processes, but we frame it around the teaching. And we something that frames a lot of our thought about language learning is the credentialization, like knowing how much learning. And usually that's involved in some assessment. And many of us will be either working in a university or working in a school or a college or wishing to work in schools, university or colleges as teachers. And so one of the main things that frames our work as teachers is actually assessment. And this is where AI has had the biggest impact on language learning. Cheating and assessment security has been problematic for decades. And the current AI stuff will only make the situation worse, right? So if we think about universities and so on, and schools, a lot of what we do is we certify that students have learned the language, or we help them to pass TOEIC or TOEFL or IELTS or any of these numbers of tests that people need for work or for applying for a job, all these kind of credentialization. So this is our teaching itself then is framed around these assessments, and AI has actually made it a lot worse. So for example, according to a survey written for the Higher Education Policy Institute, and this was released only a few days ago, the 92% of university students are now using AI in some form, and 88% have used generative AI for assessments. So basically, we, as teachers with AI, how is it affecting our learning? Well, some of the forms of assessment that we're using are no longer reliable. So this a famous paper by Schaff and co performed a Turing test. So asked professors at a university if they could tell between a real student and between and the AI generated content, and they couldn't. It wasn't reliable. They could not reliably tell between the two people, between the two options. And a lot of particularly things like essays and stuff, we simply can't tell anymore. The generative AI models are getting so good that it's difficult to tell, if we're in this kind of massified model of higher education that has come about from mainly UK, EU, and America, where you have as many students as possible and as few teachers as possible. So you have mass assessments and automated language testing and things like this. Really, they're very difficult to rely on, and it's getting quite difficult to stay ahead of the technology. Even in traditional tests, if you see entrance exam tests from, for example, India and Korea, China's Gakao and things, they try their best to stop and interfere with technology, but it's very difficult. In October last year, a Turkish man was arrested for having a camera which could read the exam and then relay it to ChatGPT, which would then send him the answers in an earpiece. So the technology is getting is going very, very fast. It's difficult to keep up with these kind of assessments. So this is kind of, this will impact how we teach, right? We've got to start thinking about all the different, the pedagogical shifts we're seeing, because AI is going to, right? If we think about all the different pedagogical changes we've seen in the last 50 plus years, you know, you've got the classical method, grammar translation. In Japan, it's called yakudoku and has a particular variety aimed at entrance exams for universities. Direct method, audiolingual method, Suggestopedia, the silent way, strategy-based instruction. All of these things have ways of teaching are impacted by the assessments going on and by and require different amounts or different approaches by both the teachers and the students. And now I would say we're kind of at the barrier, at this boundary between what was a post method, so picking lots of different methods that suit the teaching that and the students we're teaching and the assessments that we're doing, and an AI mediated kind of turn in this pedagogy. So in some ways, we're kind of, as language teachers, we're often having to turn this way, turn that way. We've got all these different turns in the pedagogy. It's very difficult to keep up. And this is part of the danger of that we face as teachers with this AI mediated approach, right? Now, maybe this AI mediated study or learning can help improve outcomes. So again, a paper that was released recently in the British Educational Research Journal by Yang Wei and Liu, I'm probably mispronouncing that, my apologies, found that there was a correlation between learner autonomy, academic resilience, and cognitive emotional regulation within AI-mediated study environments. But in a lot of ways, that correlation doesn't really explain causation. What it shows is that the students who are motivated and autonomous and have academic resilience, who are have no mental health issues, who are emotionally balanced, who have a lot of metacognitive skills, are good language learners. But we knew that already. We didn't need AI to know that. We didn't need the AI mediated environment to know that. So we have to be a little bit careful here. Now, okay, we've got a lot of, there's this key tension, right, between AI versus human, right? So has AI changed the way we think about language learning? Yes and no. When we look at a lot of the AI mediated study, the actual the actual models of learning are very simplistic. They're very simple mathematical approximations, probability statistics related to learning and learnability. So actually, what we understand about language learning hasn't really changed. What's changed is maybe how we deliver that, or how we get the students to engage with it, and also how the students choose to engage or choose not to engage, right? So one, obviously, there are lots of commercial apps. I don't want to pick out any particular one. I'm sure we can think of several apps. A lot of people know the green one with an owl or unicorns or whatever character they've decided to have or kill off. There's a lot of gamification. So in a lot of ways, that language learning has become a game to keep you involved with the app, not necessarily to actually improve your language learning per se, but to get you to stay up in the app and hopefully subscribe, pay a little bit of money. So we have to be a little bit careful about some of this ADI mediation, because really there's commercial interests rather than educational interests involved. Now, there are some specialized EFL tools. I've picked out one example, which I know people are working on right now. There's a professor in Japan called Jeanette Dennison, who's doing some really interesting work with medical English and having students practice with an AI before they meet a real patient. So there are possibilities there, right? But the key point is this, that if we are to keep our, if we are to keep this learning going, we have to be personalized to justify our roles as English teachers, as educational institutions. We have to be providing both like assessment and learning, which is more personalized and productive. So we need to get our students to engage with it. Now, obviously, if you're lucky, you have fabulous students as a teacher, and they're all motivated and they're all really, really into learning, language learning. But that's not the case for most people. And most people, even the motivated students, have ups and downs. So a lot of the time, there's this question that comes up particularly in computing and AI: will language teaching exist in the future? And that I was at a conference in Japan where a Japanese professor who deals with AI and runs different types of models and so on just asked this question, like, what in the future, what are language teachers going to do? And it's a little bit alarming that we have to, in some ways, advocate for language teaching if we are to continue doing it, right? So I quote this study by Lin, for example, who found that Chinese learners of English not really that interested in learning English because they can reach for their smartphone and use an app to talk. So we've got to try and as teachers, we've got to focus a lot on advocating for a type of pedagogy that fits our students as individuals, as part of their growing identity in the second language we're focusing on. So this is all leading up to me talking a little bit about a project that I'm part of, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about these challenges of AI in education, right? So there are some, I'm sorry, this is the most scary picture, AI generated picture I'm sure you've seen. There's a lot of over-reliance on AI generated content. And this leads to cognitive offloading. If you don't know cognitive offloading, it's really how what students will do to try and reduce the amount of thinking or the cognitive, the thinking burden that they have to do as learners. Now, this is been studied for a very long time. Dawson, for example, is concerned with cheating and students not doing, trying to avoid or cognitively offload some of the language learning work they do just to get the grade, right? And unfortunately, AI does really enable this, particularly the current models that they're using. So there's a danger of this reducing the amount of critical thinking and creativity we see in learners. There's there's a danger that our students will become reliant on AI for their self-study, for deciding if this is good or bad. It's a real concern. There's also the ethical concerns of bias, misinformation, data privacy. As I'm as a lot of the American electorate are discovering, there's quite a big difference between what this person says over here and what happens in the social media and what they actually do when they finally get voted into office. So we have to be very careful because, again, a lot of this AI is concentrated in large corporations, governments who have a bias, have an agenda, and we have to be a little bit careful about kind of data privacy as well. This coming back to this challenge of it, this is a little bit older, but maybe more relevant to Japan, I guess. And we've got the English there, but in Japanese it says "Watashi ga ii daigaku de neru tame ni ryoshin ga takusan harau." So there's a danger that a large number of our students, university students, are going to use AI to cognitively offload, to take some of that workload and just do the things which are not actually good for them and their intellectual growth, right? So there are pedagogical concerns with some of this AI, right? Can AI enhance or replace teacher expertise? Currently, no. They can't replace teacher expertise. I obviously it can. I think it can enhance teacher expertise, and I'll talk about that that relates to the project that I'm going to talk about a little bit, and we're going to talk. I want you to think about, like, how does AI impact the classroom dynamics and student engagement? So does it impact? Yes. Right? Will it in the future? Probably. Now, for example, some reactions of older professors in Japan is that they're going to try and rewind the clock, and they'll do only do traditional pen and paper exams, for example, or they will do academic writing, but the writing will only be done in class. And there are problems with that. And we can't really put AI back in the box and ignore it. We're not helping our students if we don't use AI. So one of the problems we have, though, is when we introduce AI to our English language classrooms, most of the commercial AI advocates are in it for the money. So we get imperfect products, or things that AI systems which are not very good for data privacy, or they only follow one standardized form of English, ignoring the multiple different world Englishes there and varieties there are. So we have to be a little bit careful. So at this point, it's good to have to understand it a little better. We need to have some idea about the current AI models that are out there. Now, there are conferences and papers and all people far more knowledgeable people talking about this in computer science world. So what I'm going to talk about is very much in broad brushstrokes, right? So we've got to keep some key ideas about these models, right? The first one is that most models rely on mathematical vectorization of data. So what that means is the data is arranged and prepared and optimized for processing usually in vast or huge GPUs, so graphic processing units. So the graphics cards that that the computer gamers out there will really enjoy. And if you're not sure what vectorization or mathematical vectorization looks like, think about like a Likert scale, right? You ask somebody in a survey to agree or disagree on a scale from 1 to 5, right? So you're finding some kind of data there that you can turn into a vector, which allows you to put it into, arrange it into a matrix, which can then be processed much more easily by the hardware that is available. Okay, so let's think then about 3 extremely broad and, let's be honest, unreliable categories, because again, like I mentioned, this is a highly dynamic field and changing a lot. But it's good to think about these kind of 3 categories. All right. So text prediction, things like large language models, so ChatGPT. If anybody reads science fiction and Douglas Adams, they might think about infinite monkeys. If you have enough monkeys in a room with typewriters, eventually you end up with Shakespeare. And yes, large language models, ChatGPT, if you pay for the most expensive commercial model and you ask it, please write the next Shakespeare play, it will give a good attempt, all right? Again, this is all data that's GPU optimized, but most of the models, and this is the vast majority, are in this category of, this very broad category of text prediction, okay? There's another category which is like diffusion models. So we're talking about generative images and video. So the picture, for example, we've got here. Most famous example is this person does not exist. So if you click on that link, you get a picture of a non-existent person. This is actually where you have 2 AI systems working against each other. So you've got one AI system trying to produce an answer that's fake, and another system which is trying to spot the fake answer and check whether it's a fake answer. And so working together, you kind of optimize to your generative image, all right, or video. Yeah, it's this is useful to know because you're kind of it's for language teaching, because we can there's a lot of crossover between both the text prediction and this kind of diffusion model, right? And then we've got the third model, which I'm going to call a non-player character, because it comes from video games. We have these autonomous agents, a lot of financial trading, for example, these financial limit order books at trading firms use these autonomous agents to conduct certain tasks in this kind of simulated reality that they map out. So think of like a robot vacuum cleaner. That's probably the easiest one to understand. It has like a two-dimensional model of your floor, and it will try and work out the best way to clean the whole floor. But this has this idea of reinforcement learning. So again, this is like a kind of a very simple mathematical model of learning. Literally, it's like summative feedback. The AI does something, you say it's good or bad, and there's some reward function. Okay, so it's a good example of how AI is disruptive of teaching and learning, because the model of learning is actually too simplistic. I'm not going to talk too much about this, because I'm going to say, like, if you're interested, there's a wonderful YouTube channel which talks about all of these kind of things to give like a more detailed look at these things. What we need to know, though, is that most of the available models are currently a variety of this text prediction, but there is overlap. Okay, so now this brings me to the project that we're just beginning at UCL. And this has come out of a paper about what they termed teacher alchemy. This paper here by my supervisor, Professor Sandra Leeton-Gray, and another UCL professor, Mutlu Chukarovka. I think I'm pronouncing that correct, Karovka. And they brought together in this paper these AI models with legitimation coding theory, right? So we've talked about this, the current AI models out there and the different varieties there are. And now they're bringing in some of these educational sociology ideas from learning legitimation coding theory, okay? I'm going to talk a little bit about legitimation coding theory after this, but let me give you the gist. Right, so this project we're thinking about is like an ethical use of existing sociological approaches to complement teachers' skills rather than replace them. All right. Now, as I said, the danger of current AI approaches to education and the pedagogy we're seeing is there's not enough overlap between what we know we should be doing, particularly the kind of post-method approach of adapting the pedagogical approaches to our students and personalization, and the AI models. They're working very much on this very simplistic model of learning itself. So this project kind of started in this this area where we're combining legitimation coding theory with systemic functional linguistics. Now, I can't go into too much detail here because systemic functional linguistics has a huge amount of detail. The best way to think of it about it is that it focuses on how people use the language rather than how it's expected to fit together. So as I've been talking, I'm using gestures, I'm using, if I was in a lecture theatre, I might be looking at different members of the audience, so I'm using gaze, the tone of my voice, all of these things are used to convey meaning, which alongside the words that I'm using. So systemic functional linguistics tries to encompass all of that meaning and intention there. And so this project, we're trying to bring together the systemic functional linguistics and legitimation coding theory. Sorry, code theory. So I think I need to talk a little bit about legitimation code theory. What the idea with that is it's tracking shifts or changes in knowledge. All right, so let me explain a little bit more about legitimation code theory. Legitimation code theory is the child, so to speak, of a professor in Sydney called Carl Mayton here, and it's kind of a toolkit of sociological theory to describe knowledge construction in the classroom. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the way that knowledge is co-constructed in the classroom, has those different patterns of construction, knowledge construction, are associated with different outcomes. So certain patterns are associated with better outcomes is the idea. And there's been a rapid uptake of this approach across both general education and language learning, and in combination with systemic functional linguistics. Now, one of this idea is that the kind of foundation of this idea is that I'm probably going to get this wrong, and Carl is probably going to write me an angry email if he sees this video, is that we can look at the different meanings and intentions and discussion and discourse in the classroom as a social field, and we can separate out the different relations between knowledge and between the knowers and so on. So he wrote a great book called Knowledge and Knowers, and we can see how he separates out knowledge practices into social relations and epistemic relations, and then interactional relations, subjective relations, discursive relations, ontic relations. Now, anybody who's from a scientific background or a computing background would immediately confuse this diagram with a decision tree or machine learning tree. So where you can immediately see that legitimation coding theory has possible applications in computing. Could be, it fits down. It's based on this idea that you can make a decision about separating knowledge construction into these different parts, right? So Carl Mayton derived this idea from Basil Bernstein's work, talking about translation devices. And in most of the research, most people separate their data in using legitimation code theory, using this type of, well, not most, one approach is to separate it into these translation devices. Now, I don't have time to talk about all legitimation code theory. If you get the chance, I really highly recommend you go have a look at his website. If you are a teacher, it's immensely helpful to have an understanding of it, right? Now, there are several different dimensions to it. You don't need to use all of it, but you know, Carl is always talking about just using as much as theory as you need to understand your problem. So today I don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm going to just talk about two of those planes. All right. The first one is specialization. So the idea that you can separate out the underlying practices, dispositions, and contexts into different types of knower codes. Is it important how much you know, or is it more important who you know, for example? So showing the kind of rules of the game within that social field. So if we think about AI, what we could ask the AI to do is, effectively what we're asking the AI to do is read the room for us, right? We want it to analyze these legitimation codes, the specialization codes, the social relation codes, to understand what are the rules within that social field that we're examining, right? So it's already been used to show highlight problems where there are clashes between learners and teachers or the pedagogical practices. So Chen et al. looks at Chinese learners at on an online course with an Australian university, and how the learners' dispositions and the pedagogical approaches don't match up, and there are problems there. So what this can do is can help to determine where a problem is going wrong or how we can optimize the teaching. Okay, so now if we think about this separation, these relations give us direction to our vector. Remember I said earlier that the AI, we need to vectorize our data. So if it's a positive or negative, we can choose it gives us a direction to our vector. And we can then use the systematic functional linguistics to give our vector a scalar quantity. So how much in one direction, for example. Okay. Now, I want to cover one more plane. I don't have a huge amount of time, but one more dimension of LCT, which is really useful, is semantic waves. Now, this is used to examine the semantic gravity or the semantic density of knowledge construction in the classroom. So semantic gravity is the context dependence, and semantic density is the complexity. So the most feasible, this is actually the most feasible concept to model using current AI models, the category 1 text prediction, right? And traditional text mining. So if we look again at Carl's work on this, in the model here, we've got 3 different profiles. We've got a profile A, which is in a classroom where all of the conversation is abstract theoretical, all right? And then we've got a profile B, which is every mundane examples. And a lot of the body of work of legitimation code theory is saying A and B are not profiles you want. If you don't unpack this theoretical data and you don't explain or theorize this everyday context-dependent data, the knowledge construction within the classroom is, in a lot of ways, not as successful. Outcomes are not as good. What you maybe want is to have this wave of knowledge construction. So you have an example and then a theorization or explaining, and it's unpacked in the given another example, right? So you're constantly moving between these two. And now again, we've got an opportunity here to maybe optimize this with other AI models. So we think about the adversarial models, like the diffusion model, thinking about something which is focusing on semantic gravity and something that's focusing on semantic density. Okay, so I've only got about 5 minutes or so left. What are the potential benefits of doing this with AI and legitimation code theory? Well, I mentioned already we can use it for analyzing the student's learning. So if we are examining, I don't know, like we're giving an oral test, or if we're in a classroom looking at the student language, we could analyze that knowledge construction, right? If they're just talking at this bottom profile, for example, for semantic waves, if they're not seeing this wave pattern, if we're suddenly seeing this sudden drop, we can give some idea about what we need to scaffold for our student learning. And obviously, we can also help teacher training. So if you imagine you're teaching your first ever lesson, I suddenly, that's my first ever lesson. I'm thinking back, my students were inner city London students, very scary. Not sure there was much knowledge construction. But if you have, for example, you could use video or audio data and use the AI to look at those kind of semantic waves, for example, and give you some visualization for if we had better kind of waving through the data, or if our students, 1 or 2 students, or your explanation was suddenly, stuck at one level, right? Again, with these semantics waves, we want to kind of this movement between different types of coding, okay? And so, of course, you can also use this for optimized lesson planning. So you could use this approach to look at a lesson plan to decide, okay, so this area, maybe we're talking about too much about an elite knowledge code. Maybe we need to tone that that social relations down and do some other activity. So AI and LCT, challenges and future directions. There are some huge challenges. And this is perhaps why we haven't seen, why it's taken more than 10 years for most of this AI to take off the ground. Most of the ChatGPT and other models are more than 10 years old. These text predictors are based on work that was done for grammar checkers, translation, predictive text. So when you're writing in your web address into Google, it trying to predict which website you want to go to. It's taken a very long time for AI to get to this point, and some of these challenges still remain. The first one is huge: equipment costs. NVIDIA is a hugely wealthy company for a reason. America has put on trade embargoes on certain chips to China and Russia and other countries because these text predictors require a large amount of equipment and a large data set. AI models that are based on English data sets are better because there are more English websites that they can scrape the data from. Other languages like Japanese, for example, the ChatGPT is actually pretty bad in Japanese because the data set it has is much smaller. And now everybody knows about AI, they're charging for that data. There's also this cost of training. So you have to run a large servers for a long time to process all of this data. And this kind of comes up. DeepSeek. I think everybody has heard of DeepSeek by now, has come up. It hit NVIDIA's share price because it was aimed at allowing cheaper entry. So I was curious, how much was it going to cost to set up a cheap DeepSeek model? And I asked one of my old university friends, Andy Larson, who works over with Amazon Web Services. Amazon, their real business is actually web services. They make most of their money from web services rather than the actual retailing. But typical costs for them would be about $113 per hour. So you're talking about $80,000 per month to run a cheaper, fairly reliable DeepSeek model on a commercial server. So this is a huge challenge. And myself and others are all, and my supervisor are all trying to chase this funding. I need to finish up quickly. Another thing is this technical limitations in AI's ability to capture nuanced human interactions. Text prediction doesn't do everything. We need to be able to get some of these other models, such as the diffusion models that can track and identify objects involved. So gesture recognition, things like that. And again, this is the other problem, that a lot of the mathematical models of learning are simplistic. They use some very powerful statistics to compensate, but the actual mathematical model of learning are simplistic, right? And there's a lot of there's a need for this interdisciplinary collaboration. So in Sandy, my supervisor's arranging this team, we've got people who are AI specialists, that's not me, pedagogy specialists, maybe me, linguistics, so there are various people who know systemic functional linguistics better than I do, for example, and we have a lot of that interdisciplinary thing. So finishing up, AI is here to stay. We need to think about need to think about our teaching, because traditional approaches, particularly assessment, are not reliable in this new AI-mediated language learning. And we need to think about how do we ensure AI enhances teaching rather than replaces teachers, because in my opinion at least, the AI-mediated learning is not good enough, because the maths does not represent how we learn or how we teach. So we have to focus a lot on this personalized productive pedagogy if we want people to study with us. And I would argue that LCT enhances our understanding. If you don't know much about LCT, please go have a look at Carl Mayton's work. It's really, really interesting, really useful as a teacher to know. And with our project, we're looking at how LCT analysis could be available using AI, but it's all these massive resource challenges involved, and AI is changing very rapidly. Most models of AI are closed source, so we don't know what's happening. And as I said at the beginning, a lot of what I've just said may already be out of date. I don't know, and nobody does know unless you're, one of these people who's sequestered away in working on OpenAI or with Meta and Llama and so on. So I'm going to stop there, and maybe if anybody has any questions, I'm going to hand over, and if we have any questions. Thank you very much.